did I not tell you, like, we had terrific people here today, right? So we're going to kick it off. So I have a... Yes. If you would like, folks of you who are joining us online, if you'd like to send us a comment or question, you can use www.slido. You can use www.sli.do, and the code is TOX. Okay, great. So send those questions in. I have some questions, but I think we promised people participation, so I'm going to put my questions to the side and open it up for the audience, see if the audience has any questions. Is it you just want to hear my questions? Is that what's going on? Sure, come on up. Yes, please.
Thank you for this enlightening event. Eva Blaisdell, I am an investor and space entrepreneur. And I am here to hear from the best status of the environment and the policies and challenges here on Earth. Because as of this morning, together with my partners, we launched Environmental Protection Initiative addressing space.
Wow.
So thank you for your reaction, and we are doing it because unless we people, you, me, few of us, start recognizing this opportunity, big governments out there are going to rule the space. So there is a tremendous excitement. We are doing it. I committed funding to it, and I am sure we are going to be very active. The reason that I am sharing it with you is because we are very excited, but also to recognize you as pioneers of doing the right stuff here on Earth. My question after this introduction is as follows. What can you share, or what would be your wish list for taking your principles, your commitment, your life work, and now space is your canvas?
Wow.
And spontaneous answer will do it, because you know what? If you go and look what's happening with the environment of space, nothing. No one owns it. So that's the opportunity. And last but not least, facts, because you were going beautifully with facts. Right now, space around the Earth is reaching the danger point because there is enough debris that we better take action. I will appreciate very much to putting you on the spot and hearing what you say. Thank you, sir.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. So
well, that's definitely a first. Space, the final frontier. Do you have anything?
Well, until people value it, people will continue to shove trash, like the tragedy of the commons. Right. So hopefully, we'll have companies, and we work for a good number of leadership companies that work in IT and electronics who see there's a whole new space out there, will show leadership. The challenge is there is a lot of debris. My uncle actually worked for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and growing up, I wanted to be a space cadet. But I think about that all the time. There's a whole world out there while we have not taken great care of our world. So I guess educate kids, and then make sure the leadership companies who have the funds, who are wealthy enough, get there first and say, this is how we're going to do things, and make it that's how we're going to do a better job. How are you going to get rid of all that space trash? I don't know. Waste management? It's not going to do it, I don't think.
So I'm going to go to the principal side of that, which is I started as in hazardous waste. So I would be, one, clean up the haz waste that's already out there, and then don't make the same mistake again. So as you choose materials that are going out to space, be very, very intentional about what those materials are like, how they're sourced, what contaminants are in them, and think about, how they're likely to be. You think about the exposure route, like what's going to be impacted by those materials that you put up there.
Great, and I'll add one thing. Since you invited us to say in our wildest dreams, what would we have happen? I think it's like a second chance, right? Because we've used all our resources here. What if we learned, right? So one thing I would think, a systems-based kind of life cycle approach to thinking about how we colonize Mars. You can say that now, and it's not like you're crazy, right? Elon Musk is talking about it. must be feasible, right? So how would we think about it? We think about it from a life cycle perspective. So not just what we're putting on Mars, but what we're doing here in the development of these new technologies and how we deal with it. That's one thing, a life cycle approach. And the other thing I would say is to really take primary prevention seriously in doing the design. I think that's, you guys are talking about that. And I think like if we could embrace primary prevention where it wasn't just nice if we can do it, but say that's the imperative, and if you can't do it, then you go to secondary prevention. I think that would be my wildest dream come true. But my dreams don't matter. Let's go to the next question.
Several Slido questions. One of them is about how do we ensure that, Okay, so several Slido questions. One of them is how do we make manufacturers make products that are healthier, but without the price tag that are usually associated with those healthier products? What kind of incentives can be used for this?
So I think some of that is going to be, I talked a little bit about the alignment of market supply and market demand pull. I think we're getting close to the fact where we're going to align that. One of the challenges of getting green chemistry on the market is we're up against an incumbent technology where the costs have been externalized to human health and the environment. So I think we need full cost accounting that will preference greener products on the market, and then we need to actually create that green marketplace. We're still at the beginning. The growing pains that we're seeing are we're creating new supply chains up against a petroleum-based industry. So that's the challenge that we're having. So I think that's not something that's, well, first off, it's lately, depending on where the sectors are, there are greener products on the market that are not more expensive. And then also we can learn from those about how we can scale up. I think it's a matter of economy of scale. Once we get enough products on the market in different sectors, the costs are going to go down. But we do definitely need to take those externalized costs and push them back in. We're subsidizing the petroleum industry and therefore the toxic products that are on our shelves. We need to stop doing that, and we can equalize those. But that's a big societal question we need to answer.
Ditto.
Okay, so I'm going to push you a little bit then, because so full cost accounting, thinking about supply chains, right? So that's kind of like first order how, but now I want to take a step back and say, okay, so how do you get to full cost accounting being the practice that incorporates these costs into that? Like, how do we do that?
So you know that you're going to get system answers from me. So I think even though I was a little down on regulation before, regulation is one driver, and then all the drivers that I talked about up there, I think we need to amplify those. Investments, consumers, what else did I have up there? Supply chains. I think where I'm seeing it is the front end of the supply chain pushing back up and changing that market. So I think that's how it's going to happen. It's starting to happen. It needs to be. Not sure how to make it bigger, but I could use help thinking about how to do that. Maybe some economists, behavioral economists.
You help her?
I usually stay behind the scenes and just make sure everything is safer already. So.
Okay. Anybody out there? How do we get to full cost accounting? Means when we figure out how much something costs, we take everything into account, including the environmental impacts of stuff, the cost of regulation, and so how do we get that to happen? Yeah.
This isn't an answer. This is more of a
Oh, darn.
a further complication. But I was thinking about this with respect to the example that you brought up earlier, which is e-waste, right? So when we talk about full cost accounting, we're not really talking about the differential cost of lives or the way in which we differentially rate lives. So the whole point of exporting waste is that the life someplace else
Is less valued.
If you were to teach even rudimentary cost accounting, how would you begin teaching that to an undergraduate? Like, so once you extract petroleum from Nigeria and the acid rain and the life, I'm just trying to walk through it a little bit so that we
Right.
would know who would be teaching these courses, what or
That's-
disciplines they would be in.
That's an excellent question. I think economists definitely need to come into it, and I'm speaking off the top of my head at this point, but I think full cost accounting is probably maybe not the right phrase, because I'm talking even broader than that. It's like when you do the trade-off analysis, think about trade-off analysis through the entire life cycle so that you don't offshore waste, for example. And yeah, so I'm not sure who else needs to be in the conversation, but I would love to flesh that out more. It's a conversation that needs to happen. It's starting to happen. We need to bring the economist into it for sure.
To kind of add to that there seems to be a little bit of a philosophical conundrum that I've experienced. And so I'm working directly in the personal care space, and there's a deep awareness that the consumers in this space and household goods space are really pushing for safer and sustainable. Like in the 80% or 80% plus, consumers are really valuing this. But when you talk and you look at other industries, there are actually a lot of industries and companies within industries that are doing a lot of behind-the-scenes pushes for safer and sustainable. They're just not talking about it. And when we question them, why aren't you talking about it? Because it would help everybody if we're all on board. They're like, well, because our consumers don't care. So I have this philosophical conundrum of like, how can the same consumer that buys a car, and that car might have 90% of the materials used fashioned in a sustainable way, and they say they don't care, but they are adamant about what they put on their bodies or in their, what they ingest in their food. So I think there's a mindset that I don't know what the answer is, but it's a consumer-driven mindset of like, how do you change your value system, and maybe you push the companies to speak to the sustainability and the parameters are already taking place, or that you demand it more. I don't know.
So we lost our anthropologist. I would think this should be a great person to have on this conversation. But we do see that consumers, and the other shift I would make is shift us from thinking of ourselves as consumers to citizens and active citizens. And I think that's, that can be, we can coexist in the same person. But what we do see in terms of response, we talk about in, on, and around. And so the first thing we're concerned about, we regulate drugs a lot more heavily than cosmetics, for example, even though it's nominally the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. The cosmetics is 2 pages. And we've only eliminated 6 chemicals. The EU has eliminated 1,200. So just as in case you were feeling safe and feeling like the government was protecting you, even before November. Where was I going? I got sidetracked. Mention number 45 and my brain just goes poof. So that's, that's an anthropological thing that has been built into our regulatory structure. So that's something we have to very intentionally shift. And even though, some of those chemistries are the same, drugs and even operating at the same level, but people are willing to take more of a risk because we see the benefit of pharmaceuticals, theoretically. But, not necessarily for consumer products. And then that gets lessened. The fear and the cost benefit shifts as it gets to products that are further away. And that leads to the problem that you raised earlier, which is, I work on worker issues around the world, but, I'm more concerned about the next kind of iPhone than the fact that, or Samsung workers are being poisoned by, the chemicals that are being used to clean those phones and manufacture those phones are dying young of leukemia. It doesn't really register. So I don't know how to shift that. I think that's where I need to talk to an anthropologist in the risk perception piece.
So I'm going to want us to, are these new questions or is this on the same thread?
It's a new question.
Okay, so I want to go to a new question. So new question? Yes. Yeah, okay. So let's close this one out. I'm going to add one thing, though, that I think you asked a great question, Rachel, about, like, who do we bring in?
Yeah.
Because it's like, so let's make it a little dull and boring. Maybe we need to bring accountants in. Are there any accountants in the room? Okay. So think about this, like full cost accounting, how we do accounting. So this all gets linked back to what are the practices among accountants that inform financial decision making within companies, so on. How much effort have we spent on educating the CPAs and the people who develop those standards about all of this stuff? We need to be educating undergraduates, but not just engineers. We need engineers. But we also need to be educating the business folks, and we need to be educating the accounting folks. I'll just throw that in, and then let's move on to the next question. And since
there actually is the sustainable accounting, I'm trying to, SASB, yeah.
So we've already started moving in that direction, you're saying. So since you're in the front row, you get to use the microphone.
Oh, I could have also. Thanks for walking all this way.
Enabling.
So hypothetical, if either of you were given the opportunity to work with a company at ground zero, so they're a startup company, they already have the values, as Anne you referred to in your talk, for wanting to do make safer and sustainable products, what would be the 1 or 2 things that you would recommend to that company to get in place to put them on the best path towards achieving that goal? Needs to be built in right from the get-go.
Yeah, let Meg go first. I've been talking.
Well, and we do actually work. We perform a lot of cradle-to-cradle assessments, so we get so many calls from new companies, and they want to make the best things since sliced bread and save the world and be wealthy, et cetera. I'd say, first of all, have a good product. Some of the products I hear never going to go anywhere. That's really key. And then secondly, know how to run a business. So work for somebody else. That's what I did to grow my company. So you can't just, in my opinion, because you have to pay employees, you have to grow, you have to be ethical, et cetera. Know how to run a business, know QuickBooks, but have a good business idea. Because if you don't have a good business idea, no one's going to buy your product. And I see a lot of that. And it's tough to try and say, ugh, I don't, I don't think you're going to do great. But I'm an honest person, so I just say it nicely, And I don't know, what do you think? That's what I do.
Briefly,
Two
Ann, because
things.
we're going to take one last question. and we move on.
I would say set up some sort of system and principles that you're going to operate from, and I think maybe Nicole could answer this a little better, because the Beauty Counter did something very similar when they set up their company. Just so set up a system by which you make decisions, and it's going to be road tested, as you start bringing examples in and you try your product. I mean, all of what Meg said, of course, if you don't have a product on the market that works that people want to buy, what's the point of having the discussion? But yeah. Some system or principles you can come back to when you're challenged and you have to make a decision about a safer chemical.
Okay, great. I wish we had more time for it, but last question, and then I'll ask you to give brief responses.
Sorry.
I wasn't looking at you.
So, although regulation in the U.S. for worker safety and the environment is certainly not ideal, it's a darn sight better than in many other countries in the world, particularly countries from which we import a lot of our material.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, would it be effective if the federal government or the state government tax imports according to the degree to which those countries or those industries in those countries implement regulatory activities so that they protect their own workers, they protect their own environment? Therefore, their imports would be taxed further than the manufacturing in the United States. That would further encourage the United States manufacturers not to be so adverse to regulations if they're more on a level playing field. So I don't know if economists have sort of done the calculations or done that sort of analysis to see whether that would be effective or whether it's politically possible.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll answer.
I'm-
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
So, but I'm going to answer it quickly. It's a great question. My guess is if it were properly designed from a technical standpoint, right, theoretically, tax policy standpoint, it could work. I think it could if it were properly designed. I think there's two problems with it. One is it'd be really hard to design a program that actually works well, just because of the problems of integrating social policy like that into a tax code, because then you have to define stuff. But I think the other big problem is going to be in terms of global trade, and there may be significant, maybe even insurmountable barriers under existing trade treaties in terms of that being viewed as a barrier to trade. And it's a lot more complicated than that, and I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I think those are kind of the two kind of off-the-cuff responses I would have to it. Very creative, but I think it might have some real political, legal, and implementation problems, right? But we're going to have to stop now. Fantastic panel, but we got another fantastic panel that we have to get to next. And I'm going to invite people, if you had questions that weren't answered, folks are coming up again at the end, and you'll still get a chance to get that question in. Okay, am I? We have 10 minutes for a break, so please come back by 25 after the hour. Thank you.